I still remember the exact sound it made when I first saw it. Not a song, not a cry, but a grinding, wet rasp like shells scraping bone. I say saw, but that word feels inadequate. It was more like recognition through a tear in the world. Something that should never have been visible to human eyes pressed itself into my vision and wouldn't let go. My name is Mark. I used to take photographs for small coastal magazines, chasing weather and lonely places for a living, and for excuses to keep myself away from people. That night, I was alone on a black tide-slick cliff outside the town, the kind of place where fog moves like an animal and the gulls avoid landing. The moon had been swallowed by clouds. Only a thin, bruised light sketched the rocks. The air tasted like iron and old rot. Every breath felt like inhaling something pulled up from the deep. I'd gone to the cliff because a local had called and said something washed up after the storm. I pictured a carcass, maybe a seal, something the sea would eventually reclaim. I didn't expect the thing hunched on the rock to look at me. I didn't expect it to have a terrible, patient awareness. It was lit from behind by that weak moonlight, silhouette first, long hair matted with salt, arms splayed like a woman's on the stone, a torso that was too human to be dismissed as drift. Then the face, or whatever passes for a face in nightmares, turned. Its mouth was an empty, jagged cavern full of sharp, uneven teeth that glimmered as if they'd been polished on bone. Its eyes weren't eyes, not exactly. They were darker hollows that seemed to absorb light, and when it tilted its head, the sound from its throat made my teeth ache. My hands, trained to steady a camera in cold hands, fumbled at the strap and clicked a single frame. The flash was an offense, a brief purity of white that should have been relief. Instead, it revealed details that I could not unsee later. Fingernails like dark claws, skin pulled thin over the cheekbones until veins showed like fishing lines. A tail, I think, or what had been a tail, curled damply behind it, disappearing into shadow. I remember the smell then. Not just salt, but something sweet and cloying underneath, like overripe fruit left in sun, and a metallic tang that made my stomach twist. The wind carried whispers, or perhaps those were the noises in my own head, and the cliff answered with a low, resonant thud as waves smashed below. For a second I thought it would topple, that the rock would swallow the thing whole and save me the truth. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. The way it watched was enough. A pressure settled inside my ribs as if the ocean itself were leaning on me. I backed away, camera forgotten, convinced that keeping distance was the same as being safe. But safety is a fragile thing on cliffs and in stories. By the time I reached the car, my shoes were wet with something that wasn't seawater, and I could feel, under my skin, the slow crawling of a new knowledge. I had seen something no one else would believe. I told myself the drive home would fix everything, that distance and darkness would put the cliff between me and whatever that thing was. But the road smelled wrong the entire way. A damp, sickly sweet perfume that made the hairs on my forearms stand up. I kept glancing in the rear view and imagining a silhouette hunched on the rocks, waiting until the headlights swallowed it. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house felt unfamiliar, as if someone had rearranged the air inside. I spent the first hour poring over the single photograph I'd taken. On the camera's LCD, the image looked sharpened by some internal cruelty. More teeth, hollower eyes, a glistening pattern on the shoulder like fish scales. When I uploaded it to my laptop, the file stuttered. Frozen frames of static, then a frame where the creature's head was closer, its mouth open wider as if mid-scream. I tried to show a friend. He laughed, told me I'd been out too long, that the ocean will do strange things to a lonely mind. But when I deleted the image, my trash refused to empty. The file reappeared, like a blinking wound. That night, the noises began. At first, soft things, a scraping at the back door, like fingernails on wet stone, the whisper of something long and slow moving across the floor. I pressed my ear to the wooden panels and could have sworn I heard the sucking, rhythmic sound of a throat that had learned to chew seawater. Sleep fled me. When I closed my eyes, I could feel the grit of salt settling on my tongue, and the taste made me retch. Small evidence kept multiplying. Damp footprints appeared along the hallway carpet, dried into patterns that smelled faintly of brine and the copper tang of old blood. My pillow was crusted with fine sand the color of ash. I woke one morning with a dark, crescent-shaped abrasion along my collarbone, as if something cold had gripped me and then released. The bruise it left pulsed like a heartbeat I could not control. When I touched it, the skin felt oddly rough, like scales beneath wet skin. People began to ask questions I couldn't answer. A neighbor called to say she'd heard singing by the shore at dawn, a slow, uncanny lullaby that made the dogs whine and the children hide. The local paper ran a story about fishermen finding nets full of shredded hair-like fibers. Someone else reported a baby whale washed ashore with its mouth jammed open like a gasp. Each report arrived like a loose tooth in my skull, rattling my certainty loose. The worst part was the way my reflection stopped agreeing with me. In mirrors, I saw shadows at the edges of my face, where there had never been shadows before. A damp patch spread under my shirt, even when my skin was dry. I began to dream of a mouth opening beneath the waves, and woke with the sound of that grinding rasp still in my ears. It was getting closer, not by moving over the rocks, but by migrating into the air I breathed, into the things I touched. I started to understand, with a clarity that felt like sickness, that there was no separating seeing from summoning. I had brought it into focus with my camera. The act of witnessing had been a kind of invitation. The question that now pressed against my ribs like cold fingers was not whether it would come for me, but how it would make me come to it. I tried every barricade I could think of, locks, lights, loud music, as if sound could stitch me back into a world that made sense. For 3 nights, the house was a theater of small horrors, the slow drip of water from nowhere, the mirror fogging with breath I hadn't taken, the camera on my table coughing up new frames as if developing itself. Each picture was worse than the last. Closer angles, teeth gleaming with a wet patience, a smear of something dark and glistening on the rock beside it that I could have sworn matched the bruise on my collarbone. On the 4th night, the singing started again, but this time it threaded through the rooms like smoke. It came from everywhere at once, the fridge, the radiator, the very pipes, and it pulled at my chest with the steady insistence of tide. I packed the camera without thinking, not to record, but because the weight of it made me feel like a man and not an invitation. I drove back toward the cliff with the windows down, despite the cold, wanting the wind to be a thing between me and the sound. The beach at dawn was a wrong color. The horizon bled a rotten mauve, and the foam looked like shredded bone. Where the rock jutted up, the creature sat waiting as if the dark had folded itself into a chair for it. But it wasn't alone. Shapes moved in the shallow water, low silhouettes that rose and fell with an unholy rhythm, other things the sea had kept. They watched me come as if they'd been expecting not a hunter, but a guest. When I lifted the camera, my hands trembled not from fear, but from a strange, urgent recognition. The viewfinder framed the scene and then, impossibly, framed me. In the glass, I saw the shadow spreading along my collarbone blossom into a scale, a tiny crescent that caught the weak light. I blinked, and the scale was gone. I blinked again, and another had formed along my wrist. The camera's shutter clicked, though I hadn't pressed it, and in each automatic flash, the creatures in the water inched closer. The closest one climbed the rock with a grace that mocked my clumsy panic. Up close, its face was not a face, but a map of things that had been eaten and remembered. Rows of teeth that chewed the air, hair that clung like kelp, eyes that swallowed light. It reached toward me, and the air around its fingers smelled of brine-soaked iron and something sweet and rotten, the scent I'd tasted the first night. When its hand brushed my throat, the bruise flared white-hot, and for a moment a rush of images flooded me, the camera shutter opening and closing in places far beneath the surface, mouths tasting salt, nets tearing. I realized then that witnessing had been less a verb than a transference. With each frame, I had given it parts of myself, my focus, my attention, the names I used to call the world. It didn't need to drag me down. It only needed me to acknowledge it. So I lowered my face close to the creatures and felt, absurdly, that it was curious, not cruel. My lips brushed its damp skin. It tasted like metal, like storm-sick air, like the memory of drownings. The sea took the camera first. It fell from my hands and vanished in a bubble of dark. Then the water closed over my knees, my thighs, and I sank because nothing in me anymore resisted the pull. Above the hush of the waves, I heard a sound that could have been a laugh or a word. It was my voice answering back to a voice it had known belonged to the deep. It spoke in my voice.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.